Hi, everyone. I hope you can see me. This is our first time live streaming, and I'm so thrilled today that we have Simon Carrington on the line. We are going to talk about everything from choral technique and vowels and Renaissance music to what he's been up to during quarantine, perhaps a favorite recipe. We'll see what he has to say. I'm going to add him to the call. Welcome, Simon.
Hello, Kathleen. This is great. I was worried there because I wasn't visible, but now I say I am, so I'm alive and ready to talk.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's really, really wonderful to have you here, all the way from. Would you tell us where you're calling from?
Yes, I'm calling from Bradford-on-Avon, which is a small Georgian town in southwest of England, near to Bath, which is where many people will know Bath, and we're just a short hop down on the railway from there.
I did Google it. It looks absolutely beautiful.
Ah, you did?
I did.
Well, anybody wants to come and help us restore yet another old house, they're welcome.
Is that what you've been doing during quarantine? What have you been up to?
Well, it's what I've been doing all my life, to be honest, but there's been a bit more time lately. We've lived here a couple of years, but normally at this time of the year, we'd be in France in a house we've owned for over 30 years, which also needs constant maintenance, but we can't go, of course, we're blocked. We're waiting, hoping to leave in the middle of June, but the dates keep shifting, so nobody's sure, because we need to go by car.
Okay, right, and borders are closed over there.
Well, it all depends on the ferry companies. I keep on having bookings and they keep cancelling them and moving them forward. The moment June 15th, if you happen to think of us on that date, we're supposed to be on the boat.
Fingers crossed. I'm in the same situation. I'm hoping to visit my family in Newfoundland, also in
Ireland,
this summer, and have a standing ferry reservation that's getting further and further into the future. So
they move it for you, do they? They move it along.
Well, at the moment, they're not taking any outside folks. The island of Newfoundland are being extra cautious, which is understandable.
I remember Newfoundland from our King Singers days. We performed there several times. Yes, we did.
Tell us about King Singers. It's one of the things I wanted to ask you about was that experience of starting a group from scratch. You, I suppose, didn't know what a sensation it would become. We have a number of young artists in the Amadeus choir who are members of a small vocal group. They're wonderful, called Octava. And they're just at the beginning of this journey of trying to form their group. And so tell us what that looked like for you, and if you have any advice for groups that are just starting out.
Well, the thing is, of course, we rather stumbled into the whole thing. It was a bit of a snowball principle. We'd been singing together in the choir of King's College, Cambridge. The original group were all roughly contemporaries there. And we used to come out of chapel and then go across the road to a local watering hole and sing music which was not appropriate in chapel. And it was that sort of mix which gave us, in the initial repertoire, the whole idea of mixing light and serious and so on. And it bit by bit, it began to pull together. But we went through, and I would say this to Octava, that we went through some very difficult times, and you just have to stick at it. And luckily we did, and we pulled through. I mean, we gave our debut with the name The King Singers on the 1st of May, 1968. So they've just passed their 52nd anniversary, the group that is, and which there are now two members who were born after I retired, after having sung for 25 years. So it is a pretty remarkable span. But no, we gave our debut in a very important concert for us because we shared it with Academy of St. Martin's, Neville Mariner, Simon Preston, Barry Tuckwell, who was a very famous French horn player. And that was a great success. And then that very year, our top voice, who you'll never have heard of probably, Martin Lane, a most marvelous singer, had a tumor on the brain. Can you imagine that? And it was very serious. He survived and lived on, but he was never able to sing again. So we had to go through that. And then on a slightly lighter note, another of our members won the Tauber Scholarship and went off to Vienna to be a soloist. So we had a couple of years where we were sort of struggling. But then in 1970, we had Tony Holt joined us and Nigel Perry, and they became the group that then went on for 10 years. And then it began to gradually put itself together. But we had to do things which, and now I don't know that the group, these young guys, I don't know if they would do it. I mean, we went away for 3 months. My daughter was 1 year old. I had to record cassettes and send them by mail because there was no such thing as internet. So it was tough. which is why I'm grateful to my wife, Hilary, who stuck it out all these years and went through that period. So all I can say is, practice, develop, stay confident, take advantage of opportunities as and when they arrive, be flexible and be collegial and all those things, which helped us a lot to get going.
Thank you. I think that's advice that applies to everything, especially these days. The flexibility aspect seems to be the name of the game.
Yes,
tell me about
I don't know the voices of the group, but whether they've been singing together for a long time, whether they've appointed any new ones, quite how it's working. Are they all contemporaries?
Yes, I believe they're all founding members. They grew up together in the Bach Children's Chorus.
Right.
They're now all graduated from that chorus, but pursuing various individual careers as well as trying to keep the group.
Well, that in the end becomes the test, because we were sort of doing the same. I was freelance double bass player, and some of the others were singing in groups, BBC Singers, St. Paul's Cathedral, and that sort of thing. And there comes a point where we had to decide to go full time, and that's a tough one. And maybe, that's something they want to think about. Maybe they're not even thinking about that. But it's making it a full-time commitment is a challenge and has to be thought about very carefully.
Yeah, very difficult. And financially speaking, it's so many factors.
Right.
Who knows what choral singing will look like, in the years to come.
Mm-hmm.
But tell me about, I'm sure you, like everyone, has had a lot canceled in the coming months. What are you missing most about making choral music, and what are you looking forward to?
Well, I have to say I'm astonished and amazed by the inventiveness of all my colleagues with all this remote groups and all this kind of thing. And I'm sort of, in a way, I suppose it's fair to say that I'm jolly relieved that I'm not involved in it full time now, and trying to conceive those kinds of ideas. I would have normally been doing the main courses. I do the one in Sartiano in Tuscany, to which you came, didn't you?
That's where we met. That's where we
Yes. That would have been this year it was going to be a 2-week session rather than 1 week, and it was going to be the closure for my two wonderful colleagues who started it, Brian O'Connell and Gail Leckler, and we've cancelled for obvious reasons. Italy was absolutely in the forefront. So that's cancelled, and so we're going to do it again next year. So it's postponed, not cancelled. And then I would have been going to Westminster Choir College for an institute. That's cancelled. And then, of course, the one which, in a way, I personally invest most in is the one at the Yale Summer School in Norfolk. And that is, for me, is a wonderful opportunity. And I have to really think about it carefully. And this year we had everybody chosen. All the auditions were through. We'd appointed everybody and they were booking the players and that. But inevitably, it got cancelled. It's late in August, so I was hoping we might be able to do it. Now, I'm only looking at you now. Is that correct? There you are.
I have all the power over here.
Oh, you do? All right. Well, whatever I'd rather look at you, to be honest. But that's up to you. So anyway, that's what I would have been doing. And of course, much more free time. I'm trying to take advantage of it. Musically, I'm doing a lot of kind of thinking and listening and puzzling and that sort of thing. Mind you, Kathleen, I have to admit, I'm getting on in years now, and I'm lucky to be working at all, to be honest. I'm doing a bit of social media stuff. I've started a YouTube channel, with my son, he's happy living with us at the moment because he's supposed to be in California, but he can't go back. So he's been guiding me a bit. So I'm trying to catch up.
That's great. I think a lot of people are using this time to embrace technology. I know with the Amadeus Choir, we're having weekly Zoom rehearsals with all
fantastic.
something of us.
I can't imagine how you do that, but I'm so impressed. I have some rehearsals, which I work with a very nice choir in Bath, actually, called the Bath Camerata, which was founded by Nigel Perrin, my former colleague from the King's Singers. Now it's conducted by Ben Goodson, who is a very active young musician around England. And I take some rehearsals for him sometimes because I just have to go down the road, and that's great. So they're in the diary in December. I'm hoping they might happen, but who knows at the moment. Then I got a few workshops in September and October, which are still there, but I don't know, we'll see.
Yeah, the threshold for cancellation seems to be getting a little longer, and we've had an event in November pushed back already. So it's
really in November.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So
was this a concert with your choir?
It was a guest performance with another choir and a pickup orchestra. So we'll see, and then but other things that are scheduled for October have not been canceled yet.
Right.
It's a difficult thing to predict and to navigate to make sure we're prepared to do something exciting.
Absolutely.
So we don't have to pivot on a dime. So that's where we're at now, is just sort of deciding when to make our own decisions about those.
Kathleen, with you in charge, I bet everything you do is exciting with your choir. I bet it is. You're a wonderfully instinctive and inspiring musician. I just had an email. I've been corresponding with Ilya Politeyev. I don't know if you remember him. He was at Yale, and we worked together a great deal. He's now my assistant at Norfolk, but he teaches McGill in Montreal, and was out there. I went there and did a very nice workshop with Jean-Sébastien Vallée a year or two ago. But Ilya told me that Montreal is quite a hotspot, because we hear about America, and we hear about United States of America and Europe, but we've not heard so much about Canada. So there is some bad places there. There
are some spots that are worse than others. I know Quebec was hit the whole province of Quebec was hit very hard, especially Montreal. But I believe we're, coming out of the woods of the very worst of it anyway.
Right. The same here, but it's slow and there's a lot of doubts. Anyway, we're not here to talk too much about that, although obviously it's very, very important.
Yeah. Tell me about your double bass playing and how that influences your style or rhythm or other skills that you bring as a choral conductor. It's a unique combination.
Well, I've always been grateful for the fact that I learned a string instrument. I mean, I started as a cellist, actually. My mother was a cellist, a fine cellist, and my daughter now a professional cellist. So string playing was in the family a bit. I was extremely average cellist. And when I was at school at the age of about 15, 16, somebody said, why don't you take up the bass? And I did. And I immediately got into the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain, which, of course, was a tremendous opportunity, which I would not have done on the cello. In those days, when I listen to the young bass players in the NYO now, I think, goodness, I would never have got him. However, I did, and launched straight into Brahms' First Symphony, I remember. But I think it's been quite a strong influence all the way through. It's a combination of how you hear and think about a score from the bottom up, for instance, and also how you, particularly string instruments. And I think the thing about the bass or the cello is that you're roughly sitting as a conductor, you're using something of the same body language, because the instrument goes down, is not turned to one side like a violin. And so I often talk about pressure on the string and resistance and all those kind of things, which I found extremely useful. I played a lot, actually, all over Britain, and first of all, I joined an orchestra in Manchester. That was a full-time orchestra. It's now called the BBC Philharmonic. But then I began playing more and more continuo, particularly with John Eliot Gardiner, who had been my contemporary at Cambridge. And that was something I really could do, because I could hear the choral lines, and I knew about the accompanying, and I could imagine the text and all the sort of things which players in the Baroque period anyway would have done instinctively. They all sang in the choirs, and they knew the masses, the text of the mass. And so I had a nice sense of that. But I also played in all the major symphony orchestras in London as an extra, and went all over the place playing for some of the great maestri. I only wish, as I put in my bio, that I paid more attention to the conducting, because it was all these people like Scholt in Karajan, and, and I was playing away there just trying to keep up.
So did you ever play any jazz as a bassist?
Oops.
Are you there?
You froze on me there. You froze. Say again.
Am I back?
I'm here. I can see myself moving, but you've gone. Yes.
I'm here.
Yes.
All right.
It might be our end. I warned you about this.
Yes, that's okay. If we lose you, just come back on the same link and we'll try to reconnect.
Right. Okay. We're just patient, I think. Yeah.
Good. Okay.
It didn't say here. It didn't say internet unstable. Usually it says that my end if it is. So it might be your end. I don't know. Anyway, here we are. Let's keep going.
Playing continuo, that's fascinating. I didn't actually know that was a focus of your double bass playing. It brings me to ask about...
Oops, now you're coming and going, I'm afraid. I see myself going all the time, which I think means it's your end, but maybe not.
It's possible. I will turn off other Wi-Fi. It may be just coming through delayed, Simon. And if I
could be,
I will send you a question in the chat, and then maybe
you
can speak to that if you don't hear me this time.
Right. You ask about continuo again.
Continuo and how, and just maybe talk a little bit more about your approach to Baroque music that involves continuo as a choral conductor.
Well, most of my approach to Baroque music, to be honest, is very much inspired by the work I did with now Sir John Eliot Gardiner. I always felt that his approach to all kinds of music making was so utterly engaging and inviting, and I worked a lot. He was a difficult, as you may well know, he's well known for his temperament. He can be extremely intolerant and extremely demanding, which he even was when we were students. And I played in his Monteverdi Vespers performance, which really launched him on his career. I was in King's College, Cambridge in 1964, and we celebrated the 50th anniversary. So I always had that in the back of my mind. And it's all to do really with the rhythm of the text. We probably talked about this a lot when you were at Yale, but this seems to me to be the key to all this. In fact, choral music making everywhere, but in Baroque music or Renaissance, you just have to sense the direction of the text and the weights of the syllables and the lines and all that sort of thing. And as a continuo player, playing bass or cello, but bass is, it's very important that you hear the word stresses and that you make sure that the rhythm you're providing underneath the ensemble reflects that. And that's what, at the time when I was playing, not so many well-trained bass players really knew much about. It just came to me naturally, and that gave me a big advantage. Nowadays, of course, with the early music movement, there are lots of very fine early music continuo bass players. There were always some cellists, but not many bass. So that gave me several years of some wonderful experiences playing that rep, and it's carried into my conducting and I realized with all through the King's Singers, we were working kind of instinctively between us. You know, we had ideas about music, but we didn't talk about that type of thing very much, about word rhythm, about rhetoric, something which I tend to go on about a lot. Yeah, not really. It was kind of built into our psyche of having sung together, and we roughly knew how pieces should go, and we just had to learn them and then develop the sound so that it was consistent and carried in large halls and all those sort of things, and also that we communicated with our audiences. But when I started teaching, I went to the University of Kansas, where I was very lucky to get a job because I had nothing on paper to show I could do it, but they gave me a shot at it. And immediately I was presented with these very nice, very good Midwestern American singers, generally speaking, have lovely voices, clear, not too much of the dreaded, you know what, in terms of sort of slightly heavyweight vibrato, that sort of thing, wasn't a problem at all. But they didn't have a lot of sense of what I'm talking about now. And so I had tremendous fun, and I began to think about it more and more and more. And I've kept that going as it's almost become an obsession. And I hear, I was just reading, I mentioned to you the other day, like this article which I wrote called Singing Renaissance Music, A Brief Guide to the Essentials. It sounds rather grand, as if I know a lot. And I honestly don't really, except that I'm convinced that this is the way they would have approached it at the time, and the rhetoric behind the singing would have been the key. And I'm going on too long here, but when I used to go to ACDA conventions and this kind of thing, I would always hear these wonderful choirs, beautifully trained, wonderfully in tune, together, lovely sound, but without that sense of the rhetoric in the text, which I think takes away a lot and makes it all a bit bland and beautiful. I used to do a workshop called I'm going to get this wrong, From Blend to Bland, a Short Walk Downhill. It was a bit rude, but I remember that one. And so that's kind of guided me, and it's becoming the thing that I do talk about almost more than anything. Doesn't matter what the period of music is. Choir's responsibility, which is why I'm not so keen on all this, the current trend of block chord, rich harmony, static music, is what John Eliot used to call listening to that music is like trying to catch soap in the bath. But of course, it's very popular and it is very moving and it's very tight. So I do it sometimes, but I'd much rather have a polyphonic line or something with a little bit more rhythmic energy.
Could you talk? One of my strongest memories of working with you was we were doing somewhat obscure Italian Renaissance music, Legrenzi and Rosenmüller.
Oh,
And
yes.
and we talked at great length. None of us had ever sung any of this repertoire before, so it wasn't as though it was a Palestrina Mass or Bird or Vittoria, who we were a little bit more familiar with as students. But you talked about embodying the counterpoint, like with your whole being, and that
Hmm.
really stuck with me in not only my singing but my conducting, and just engaging, not in a hokey or theatrical way, but just engaging. Could you phrase that better?
I thought you phrased that very well. Hokey or theatrical, yes. That is the problem, that it can, this type of approach can end up being sounding mannered. And that's what you've got to watch out for. But basically, those Legrenzi and Rosenmüller, I mean, marvelous composers, they came my way through this man, Brian Clark, who is a specialist in that period and used to send me editions and things. I think he may even have come that time. I forget whether you, what, he came a couple of times, a wonderful man who believes in that music, that period pre-Bach, with all kinds of, not as grand, not as spectacular, but extremely expressive. And the Salve Regina by Legrenzi was one of the first pieces I did. And that, everybody knows that tune, and everybody sung 100 versions of that. But that particular version I thought was very strong. And I think, yes, I think that it's critically important that every member of the choir feels the run, the line, and mainly it depends on those two things we used to talk about: the stress and then lack of stress, and suspension. And those are the two things. And I think everybody needs to feel those as they sing, which is why I'm sort of slightly boring. And I always ask people, before we start rehearsing, write the stresses under your text so you can see them straight away. Apart from the fact that the meaning must be running in your head as well. And that you can go, I quite often used to go to concerts and I could tell that the choir was trained, it had learnt the piece, but they weren't thinking what it meant as they sang it.
You could
And
tell
I
in
think,
rehearsal too. It was terrifying.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think these things are very important. So really, when it comes to Baroque music, there are some simple things. For instance, you hardly ever have an emphasis on a final chord because there are almost always settings of Latin or Italian where there's no stress on the first syllable, last syllable, and that gives you all kinds of wonderful lifts and things of that sort. So I just go on about making sure that the singers see the suspensions. By the way, they're supposed to mark them in as well. I say to a choir in a 2-minute motet, I give you 5 minutes, mark in all the suspensions and all the parts. It's good training, actually. Then you skim around the parts and you write them underneath, just a little line or something. And that gives you a sense of direction. And I think that's perhaps what you're talking about. And you feel that. I mean, obviously, you don't start wriggling about all over the place, but you feel it. You don't stand there rigidly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's stuck with me very, very strongly. I guess that it even applies in an English language,
Yes,
right? Because
any
sometimes
piece.
as Anglophones we ignore those our own language, the nuances of our own language and the stress. And
Absolutely. And I used to think sometimes that in a way we were least active of thinking about that in English. It was too familiar and you didn't think about it. At least if you've got an Italian text, you're supposed to know how the weight of the syllabic stress and all that stuff.
right.
I sort of feel myself boring on now because I always talk about this issue, but I just feel it's so important. I love to listen. There's so many wonderful groups nowadays, more and more. Of course, the Tallis scholars set the way. Well, the King Singers in a way, but I still find with many of those kinds of groups, I could do with a little bit more direction, a bit more sense of the emotional content. Last year at Norfolk, we did an absolutely beautiful piece, breaks your heart, setting of Ovus Omnis by an utterly obscure composer called, what was his first name? Jacques de Mantua. What is his first name? I forgot. But it's a wonderful piece, very short. It's actually on the Norfolk video, which is on my website. We did it rather slow, perhaps too slow, but very expressive. And we had a member of the Tallis scholars in now who are teaching in Australia, Chris Watson, who's a wonderful, wonderful tenor. But he came and he sang, and he and I, of course, disagreed on that. He thought it was all far too slow, far too. So it was quite fun. But I stuck to my guns because I was in charge. But talked, about all that quite a bit. Tallis scholars, it's all beautiful. It's a little bit too regular for my tastes, but it's a matter of taste. This utterly.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's funny. I mean, we're in a world where experts are disagreeing all the time, whether it's interpretation of Renaissance music, or when we can go back to choir practice. So it's
oh gosh,
the name of the game.
Absolutely.
Would you talk? This is my last just segue before we take a couple of questions. I believe we have some questions in the comments here.
Okay.
Is there any difference between singing that kind of polyphonic Renaissance music, which is most often done with small ensembles? Is there any difference between the small ensemble interpretation and doing it with a large choir, for example, a symphonic chorus, who we feel it's a valuable experience for them to sing that repertoire? Are there any different approaches, or is it exactly the same?
I would say it's pretty much the same. I mean, it's because one on a part or three on a part, six on a part, it's easier to reach the sort of feeling of ensemble and agreement on the lines and so on. But I'm very keen on doing, in fact, when I did my Monteverdi Vespers, it's not Renaissance, but a similar idea. In Kansas, we had 40 people in each choir, and I taught them separately and then put them together. 80, which of course musicologically is ridiculous. But it was, I think, a great experience. I always remember when we, having taught the Ave Maris Stella, which is in 8 parts, as you probably, I'm sure you know, and for the very first time, after several weeks, we then put the choirs together, and they suddenly heard these 8 parts with these, it's not polyphony, but there are moving lines within sustained notes. And I remember the look, the expression on the faces of these young people. They were just thrilled. Of course, it's a wonderful melody, and the whole thing moves in a wonderfully sort of deliberate manner. But no, I think it's fine to do. Whenever I did all-state choirs, I did lots of them in the US, you know, they could be 300 people. I always remember doing Guerrero Duo Seraphim, which is a 12-part piece, with 900 singers in the Utah All-State in the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. So there were over 300 in each choir, and it is polyphonic. There are blocks polyphonic. But my goodness, those young singers they're very well trained over there, of course. And I think it worked well. The lines were clear and people really listened. Of course, if you're in a section of 30, you have to listen to just like in the symphony orchestra, you've got to listen very, very carefully, but it's good training. So I have no worry about that. You mightn't record. For instance, I have heard recordings of Talis Speminalium with many more than 40 singers, which, of course, you know, the 40-part motet. And that, generally speaking, doesn't work. But it was a great experience for the people who sang it, for sure.
There's also a really fascinating art installation where an artist, I'm forgetting her name, but there's an artist who's recorded 40 individual voices. Have you seen this, Simon?
Yes, I went to MoMA in New York, cool. And it's actually the choir of Salisbury Cathedral. So you walk around and you hear a video. No, that's good, but it is actually, that probably isn't one on the park because it's a cathedral choir, but a very interesting experience. And have you heard the King Singers, of course, multi-tracks of a track of Speminalium?
Oh, I haven't heard
which
that.
Is surprisingly successful, surprising, I shouldn't say that, which worked out really well, and the lines are pretty clear. I think in the end, though, the best way to hear it is in the round. I always think that in many ways, all the music I've made over the years, that one of the strongest memories in my mind is standing under the spire of Salisbury Cathedral with my 40 singers from the University of Kansas, young people who've never really, many of them never been across the sea, singing Speminalium. That was one of the great experiences. It makes me get quite emotional even when I think about it now.
Amazing. We have a few questions.
Right, I'll try.
And I think I can be fancy and stick them up on the screen. This is a sort of general one about an approach. This is from Jean Ashworth-Bartle, who's a Canadian choral legend.
Oh, I know Jean.
Watching Jean, hi.
Yes, hi Jean. Wonderful to see your wedding, and I'm looking for her. Where is she? What's the question?
How much is instinctive? How much is learned? And can everything be learned?
Talking about, here it is, yes. Meaning music of all periods, I assume she means, not just what we've been talking about, Renaissance.
I think it's a more general question. Yeah.
Yes, I think the great thing is that one needs to use one's instincts and never shut them off. But you need guidance, depending on your experience. I mean, if you've been singing any of this music for over many years, then your instincts begin to take over. But what I used to enjoy so much and still do is kind of picking up on the instinctive sensibilities of young singers when they suddenly hear something and they think, oh my word, isn't that marvelous? And and then developing that. And of course, I often get asked about my time teaching at New England Conservatory, where full opulent singing was very much what everybody thought they were after. And every now and then we'd come to something with a big choir of 100, and I would say, can we just try that last chord just out of interest with no vibrato, just spin the sound, and they would sing the chord. Oh, and their instincts immediately would spark. And so I used to use those kinds of instinctive reactions a lot. So I think it's a combination of the two. Can everything be learned? Gosh, well, it's worth a try, I would say. I think there's a good chance. And both Jean and I, of course, have done many, many years of working with large groups of young people. And it is exciting to move them through various stages. Maybe in one go, you don't get to everywhere, but you can make a lot of difference.
Cool. Thank you. There's another question here from one of our members and star volunteers. This is Julie. She says, has Simon had the occasion to work with Sir David? And,
yeah.
This is relevant to us because my predecessor, Lydia Adams, had studied extensively with David Wilcox. So would you speak?
Well, I did. I was lucky enough at King's College to work with David. And of course, because I switched degrees in the middle, instead of having the normal 3 years, I did an extra year. So I actually had 4 years working with Sir David. And of course, it's an image of music making which never leaves you. I brought him to Yale, actually, while I was there. He was 85 that year. He was a little bit shaky, but he was marvelous up on the podium. Was that the year you were there? No. Kathleen.
No, I worked with him as a kid in Newfoundland.
Oh, yes.
I believe Festival 500 brought him in and did a workshop.
Well, his energy, although he was a little bit frail, of course, he then lived on to 92, I think, but his energy was remarkable. We did, Michael Scola sang Britain Hymn to St. Cecilia, and then he conducted Dixit Dominus, I think, but he was full of energy. And of course, the great thing with David was this inner rhythm. The rhythm was absolutely vital to him. That and intonation, sharp thirds, of course, was always very, very keen on. That was what he was insistent on. And he had very, very high standards. And he wouldn't mind what he said. He wasn't quite as outspoken as John Eliot Gardiner, but he could be very, very outspoken. Alistair Hume, who was my many years colleague in the King's Singers and one of my best friends, really, always tells this story about his first year when he wasn't getting on very well. And Sir David said to Mr. Hume, I think you are the worst alto we have ever had in the choir. And you had to put up with that sort of thing. Of course, Al then went on, sang in the King's Singers for 25 years. And they often used to joke about that when they met. So yes, Sir David was a huge influence, and it was an honor to have had the chance to work with him.
Wow. That's a good impression, I think.
Yeah.
My mentor, Bruce Pullen, used to talk about David Wilcox asking conducting students to identify mistakes in the.
Yes, absolutely. I use that a lot in my teaching. Bruce and I were exact contemporaries. Do you know that? Yeah, we shared rooms, actually. Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we shared a room in my last year. Bruce was a marvelous singer, kind of singer I could never have been. He had a flexible voice and all those things which I've always envied. Yes, I mean, I think David was, he was something. And of course, he had a long and marvelous career, went on almost until he dropped. Fantastic.
Mm-hmm. We have a question here also about Renaissance music, a little bit longer. I heard the Ottawa Bach Choir sing Josquin's masterpiece, Missa Pange Lingua. With a few exceptions, I find the vast majority of choirs sing pieces starting in the generation after this. But starting with Josquin, moving backwards in time to Ockeghem, Dufresne, Dunstable, Machaut, Hildegard, etc. Some of the most beautiful music ever written is so seldom heard. What do you think can be done to open up this musical treasure chest? And I would add to do it well with correct and well-informed singing.
Yes, I personally think that we were talking about doing Renaissance music with larger choirs. The further back you go, I think the more difficult it becomes, in the sense that sound which suits earlier music, Dufresne, Dunstable, Machaut, is very difficult to achieve with a large choir. It's all the slightly sort of bare fifths and those chromatic changes which can be so dramatic. I mean, the King's Singers, we did do Josquin, Machaut, not much Hildegard. I did Hildegard when I was at NEC with a large choir, singing in unison. There's very good training. And at Kansas, I did Missa Cuis Vis Toni by Ockeghem, which is a spectacular piece, which can be sung in any mode, although one mode works much better than any of the others. But I think there are groups out there, how you convert that, and people need to listen to them and be aware of them. I mean, even if you went a little bit further back, Taverner and Shepherd, those people who come just a little bit before. Yes, and I agree, it should be better known. And I bet on CBC or on radio in Canada, occasionally these pieces pop up, but they're not easily, maybe they're a little bit more austere in some ways. And some of the Eton choir book pieces and those sort of things are astonishingly virtuosic and can be difficult to absorb. But other pieces, simple, Dunstable, oh, Rosabella, gosh, I'm scratching my mind now. I mean, there's so many things there, which if you can find the right piece and can take a gem, and I always think working with amateurs or with bigger groups, the great thing is to choose the gem. And that's why I mentioned that piece by Jacques de Mantua, Ovos Omnis. There are lots of settings. That one really strikes a chord, and the way it works. But yes, I don't know how we can bring earlier music to audiences apart from carrying on what we're doing, which is having a number of fine groups in both the US and Canada for sure, I would imagine, but certainly all over Europe, recording it, getting it out there, trying to have something which really catches the ear, and perhaps hope that that gets some, what do they call it, traction on social media, things of that sort. No, I agree, though, it is marvelous music. I did Josquin Missa Gaudiamus at KU as well. We did a lot of early Renaissance there.
Cool. Oh, that's exciting. There's a question, I can't find the comment to put up on the screen, but there was a question about singing in English. Could you give a very brief overview to, I know you have very particular vowel rules, a 30-second masterclass in singing in English.
Well, I think in almost all languages, the key for the choir is to try to get the tone centered. And I spent a lot of time working on this. So you've got a centered tone from which you can move out into the different vowel colors depending on the language. If you have a sort of wide open, loud sound, as is often taught in conservatories and that kind of thing, it's much more difficult. But if you can develop a more streamlined sound, as if through a tube or a sleeve, then you're much more able to deal with the finesses of singing in different languages. Now, English, of course, now, and this is becoming more and more complicated, but what I think of, what we used to call RP, received pronunciation, or art song English, it's difficult to find. You get people like of my age who still think we talk it, but the general English you hear over the media on TV and that sort of thing is what I think of is not exactly a dialect, but it's I hate to be snobby about this, but it isn't as attractive, I don't think. It lacks a certain core, that sort of thing. So you're trying to teach art song English, well phrased, well pronounced. And in a way, you just need to be very alert to the rules as set out in voice teaching books and vowels and language books, as you are to every other language, because it's your own. It makes it more difficult because you come at it you're not coming at it from a kind of starting. You're trying to lose a lot of bad habits and sort it out. And it's up to the conductor, I think, to concentrate on this, bits and pieces all the time. There are certain words which are always going to be difficult. I always remember, by the waters of Babylon, we hanged our hearts. I've never forgotten that. That's in the Midwest. Hanged, yeah. And so you're trying to get certain vowels, and there are some of them which are bad. In North America, the great problem are things like your R before a consonant, Lord, that type of stuff. And you have to watch out for those if you're concerned to make to sing in what you think is, I don't know whether you call it Queen's English or what do you call it now, but English.
We call it.
What do you call it?
Simon's
What do you call it? Whose English?
Yours.
I missed it.
Yours, Simon's English, Simon Carrington English.
Oh, Simon's English. Oh, I try.
There's one more question that I think will be excellent to wrap up with. This is from an Amadeus soprano, Caitlin. What still nascent developments in choral singing should we be excited about? What do you think the future holds for us?
Well, the trouble is I'm an old traditionalist, as I've already said, and a lot of the music which is so appealing now and is considered to be at the forefront I find it a little bit bland, and you get tired of it after a while. But I think we all know what we're talking about. This very static music with lots of rich chords and not a lot of sense of the language. So I'm hoping, I don't know whether you call it nascent, but I hope that there always will be a 500-year link, or 600 years, thinking about the question about Ockeghem and Dufay, between what's current and what is really the whole thing is based upon. And I would hope that it takes precedence over everything else. So new developments, as they develop, there are limits, of course, because choirs, apart from the very, very expert, cannot harmonically, they can't go too far. Otherwise, they just can't, they get lost, as we all know. Difficult chromatic music and so on. But there are lots of colors which can, and now, of course, we're seeing all sorts of developments where you have body percussion and all kinds of things can be used by adventuresome singers, some of which can be done from the stage, like with the glass spinning and all those sorts of things. And all that is fun, and I enjoy all that. And I think we should definitely try to develop a bit. But I think I would be rather sort of, I don't know whether you call it conventional here, but I would like to keep the link between the traditions on which our currency is built and not lose it, because I still think that the music in the end that is the most expressive, and this is the thing, the one that really touches your heart, is Renaissance polyphony. I mean, that may sound very odd to some of your listeners, but to me, a Renaissance piece of a certain type, usually in a minor key, sung with expression, is hard to beat. Now, I know that some of this, the modern, more static pieces can be very touching. I've just been listening to a recording, actually, of, I better not mention the composer's name, it's the Stabat Mater, and it all sounds the same, which I think is a pity. It's beautiful, but it's the same. So let us be adventurous. Let us continue always to explore. Let us encourage young people, of boys and girls, as best as we can, to invest in performing without amplification, something I would add, and to use the natural rhythm. Of course, this is now so hard during the COVID crisis. You know, how can you do it without? But look forward to the moment when we can stand relatively close to each other again, feel the proximity, and that's what we share together, and just hope that comes back. We'll have to be patient, but hopefully it will return and we can go back to what we used to do.
Thank you, Simon. I think that is a perfect note on which to end today. I'm so appreciative of your time. I know you might have a little more than usual, but you're a very in-demand person, and we're just so thrilled that you spoke with us today.
Well, I'm honored, Kathleen, that you invited me, and it was just you and me here, and I have no idea who's out there. But thank you for your patience.
61 people still watching.
Oh,
so
well,
thank you so much for tuning in, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye and good luck.
Simon.
Yeah, bye-bye.